In this video, you're going to get introduced to JavaScript. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is a programming language which is used mainly for the web. You will find it usually embedded in HTML code to add more complex things to web pages than showing a static page. JavaScript can be used to add animations to the web page. It can also make the web page interactive by responding to user actions like clicking on a button. It can do some other things like validating forms before sending data to a server, or even making asynchronous calls to the server and loading data without refreshing the page, which creates a fluid user experience. JavaScript used to be restricted to the browser, but it is no longer the case. Now it is also commonly found running standalone on the server under Node.js. Now that you've been introduced to JavaScript, let's have a quick look at some JavaScript frameworks which you'll be able to learn after this course. A framework is a JavaScript library which comes with pre-built code which you can use off the shelf to add functionalities to your projects. Now there are many JavaScript frameworks available. We're going to have a quick look at the top ones. AngularJS is a framework which was used to build websites like PayPal, The Guardian, Freelancer.com, and more. React is another top library used by Facebook, Instagram, and more. Node.js. This one is a server-side JavaScript runtime which is used by PayPal, Groupon, and many others. Now you need a comprehensive and solid understanding of JavaScript before learning any of those frameworks. And this is exactly what this comprehensive JavaScript course is going to equip you with. Now, as we said earlier, JavaScript can be used both in the front end, meaning on the client side, and in the back end, meaning the server side, like when you work with Node.js. Now, this course will focus only on the client-side usage of JavaScript. Now, if you work with JavaScript in the browser, you will need to learn a few concepts. So let's go through them one by one. ECMAScript, the document objects model, and the browser objects model. So let's start with ECMAScript. ECMAScript is a standard for JavaScript. It comes with a specification of JavaScript features and how developers should implement them. So let's look at one example. So if you look at this line of code, you can see that we are declaring a variable x and initializing its value to 1. Now you don't have to worry about the syntax. This is something you're going to learn in the next chapter. But just to understand what ECMAScript is going to provide us with a specification telling us things like what keywords we need to use in our code. In our case, the keyword var to declare a variable, what syntax we need to use, how to use the semicolon at the end of our statement, operators, how to use the equal sign, and more. So this is what ECMAScript is. Now, where does the name come from? Well, ECMA stands for European Computer Manufacturers Association. Basically, JavaScript was originally created at Netscape, and they wanted to standardize the language, so they submitted the language to ECMA. Now, there was a trademark problem with the name JavaScript, so that's why they called the standard ECMAScript. That's all. Now, ECMAScript is a standardization not only of Netscape's JavaScript, but of other scripting languages. We'll explain later what a scripting language is. So the purpose of the standard was that all browsers can understand instructions written using ECMAScript. So these scripting languages or dialects, they support code written before the standardization into ECMAScript, and they also provide some features which are not available in ECMAScript. Now, ECMAScript has got many versions. So you'll hear about ES5, ES6, ES4, which was abandoned, and other ones. Now, ES5 was standardized in 2009, but new features were introduced in ES6, which is also referred to as ECMAScript 2015. Now, implementation of these features in different JavaScript engines are still underway. Now let's understand what a scripting language is. A scripting language is an interpreted language. This means that it doesn't need to be compiled. Okay, what does it mean? Well, if you pick C++ or Java and you write code in any of these languages, your code will need to be compiled by a compiler and converted to machine code. Machine code is the language that's going to be understood by your computer. And this is a very low level of code and consists entirely of numbers. And this is what your computer is able to understand. So these languages need to be compiled. Now if you pick JavaScript, normally JavaScript doesn't need to be compiled. That's why we call it a scripting language. So the JavaScript engine is going to interpret the JavaScript code into tasks to be executed straight away by the browser. So we don't have to compile the language into machine code or anything like that. We can straight away just interpret the code into macro tasks. So this is a higher level compared to that one. Now, JavaScript may be compiled in some cases, especially in modern JS engines. So in some modern engines, you will find something called JIT compilers. JIT stands for just in time. So these compilers, they will compile your code straight away just before execution of your JavaScript code. And it will be converted to a compiled code before the execution of your code. So this is something to bear in mind. So normally JavaScript is a scripting language, but in some modern JavaScript engines, you will find JIT compilers or just-in-time compilers inside the JavaScript engine, and they will compile your code into machine code before execution. Now you may be asking, what's the difference between JavaScript that is compiled and JavaScript that is interpreted? Well, modern JavaScript engines, they introduce the compilers or the JIT compilers for optimization reasons. Basically, if your code is compiled, it's actually more optimized than if your code is just interpreted. That's something to bear in mind. And just a quick clarification here, the JavaScript engine is embedded to your browser and is responsible for the execution of your JavaScript code. Now let's move to the DOM, or the Document Object Model. The DOM is a programming interface for HTML and XML documents. So if you look at this web page, you can see that it's made of different components like this paragraph, this picture, that title, and so on. So the DOM is going to represent our web page so that programs like JavaScript can access the different elements of the web page and change them. So JavaScript can change the content, the styling, and so on. So if we break down the different components of the web page like this, so inside the HTML elements, you'll find the head and the body, and this applies to any web page. Then inside the head, you will find the meta elements, the title, which you can see right there. The meta elements usually just includes information about the web page, which can be used by search engines and so on. And in the body, you'll find all the visible elements like this paragraph, that image, and also any scripts that you may have. Usually JavaScript is going to go right there. Sometimes you'll find scripts in the head element, but usually they go at the end of the body element. So JavaScript will access these elements as nodes or objects. And this is something we will cover in detail later on in the course. So now you just need to remember that the browser will provide a DOM interface. So this interface will allow ECMAScript to interact with the DOM. So this is why JavaScript can access all those elements and change them. Now let's move to the BOM, or the browser object model. So this describes methods and interfaces for interacting with the browser itself. So this includes things like showing an alert message in the browser or the web page. This is one of the functionalities built in the browser. Accessing the location of the browser, meaning the address of the web page and changing it. Accessing your browsing history, and so on. So hopefully this gave you a simple and clear introduction to JavaScript and the different components that you need to be aware of before diving into the course. In this video, you're going to download the necessary tools you will need in this course to write JavaScript code and build the different programs and projects. So first, you will need Google Chrome. Google Chrome is a really good browser which comes with very good developer tools which you can use to test your JavaScript code and debug it. So you can download Chrome using the link provided just before this video. And once you do that, you can click on the icon and then more tools, and then go to developer tools to explore the developer tools offered by Google Chrome. Now you'll find many tools there. The one we're interested in is the console. The console is going to help you test JavaScript code and debug it. So once you download Chrome, then you will need to download Brackets. Brackets is a really good text editor you will use to write JavaScript code. Now, there are plenty of other text editors you can choose from. If you're using a Mac, you can download Text Wrangler or Notepad++ if you're using Windows. Now, Brackets is a really good one. It comes with a really good user interface, and it comes with extensions you can add to the software, which will make your coding experience a lot easier. So to download Brackets, you can use the link provided just before this video. And once you do that and install Brackets on your computer, if you open it the first time, you'll get something like this. Now, to download any extensions, you can just click on that icon and then go to available, and then you can search extensions right there. Now, there is a really good one we're going to need. It's called Auto Save on Window Blur, and that's the one. So just make sure you download this one. This one will help you auto save any open files as you are writing JavaScript code, because when you are writing code, you will need to test your code as you're going along, and every time you want to test your code, you need to make sure that you save your work. Now, this extension will do that for you automatically, so you don't have to save your work every time. So once you download that extension, then you're going to be ready to use Brackets and Google Chrome all together, and you're going to be building your first JavaScript program in the next video. In this video, you're going to create your first JavaScript program. So the first thing we're going to do, just to make sure that our work is well organized, we're going to create a folder, JavaScript. You can place that in your desktop if you like. And then inside this folder, we're going to create a new folder for each chapter. So this will make it easy for you to review any concepts that you learned in the course. So we're going to create a new folder, Introduction. Okay. And then we're going to open this folder using Brackets. So what you can do, you can just open Brackets and then drag and drop the folder right there, and then it's going to be opened using Brackets. Right? So now inside this folder, we're going to have our program files. So you will find the starting files attached to this lecture. So I suggest you copy the zipped file and then unzip it and copy it inside the introduction folder, like that. All right. So now we've got our starting code. So we've got our HTML file and our JavaScript file. So at the moment, the JavaScript file is empty, and we've got a basic HTML web page. All right. So now I'm just gonna split my screen into 2 bits. And then I'm gonna open the index.html file using Chrome. All right, so that's our web page. It's pretty basic, and you don't need to know a lot about HTML and CSS to understand this program. You just need the basics. So I'm going to go through this quickly. So we're defining the document type here, and we are setting it to HTML, which refers to HTML5. And then we've got the HTML tags, which will enclose the content of the web page. So then we've got inside the head and the body. So inside the head, you place different information about the web page, like the character encoding, the title, which you can see right there, some styling. Okay, so we've got some CSS styling there. So we colored the heading using a nice color. And then you've got the body, where you have all the visible content, the heading, which you can see right there. So that's our JavaScript file, and we said earlier that normally JavaScript is embedded into HTML code. So how are we going to embed our JavaScript code into HTML? So what you need to do is add a script element at the end of the body element, like that. So then you're going to set the source of the script to your JavaScript file, like that. Right. So now your HTML file and your JavaScript file are linked. All right. Now you don't need to specify the type of your script, because by default, any script that you embed to HTML is going to be a JavaScript script by default. All right. So now you are ready to write JavaScript code inside the JavaScript file. All right. So let's write something really simple. So we just want to show an alert message saying hi. So to do that, you can use a simple line of code. So we're just gonna go to the window object and alert hi, like that. So for now, you don't have to worry too much about the syntax, but just remember that we ended our line of code using a semicolon. All right. So now if I refresh the page, you'll see an alert when the page loads. And that's saying hi. So the way this works is, after the page renders, or the browser renders the different elements of the body, then at the end, it will find the script. Then it's going to read the script line by line. So the first line is just a comment, because it's preceded by 2 forward slashes. So it doesn't count. So JavaScript is going to move to the next line, and it's got a line of code which is asking the browser to execute a task, which is to alert this message. And JavaScript will just go ahead and execute that task for you. And that's how it works. Now let's do something different. Let's bring something into the console. So first, let's show our console. So we're going to go to the developer tools. And here is our console. You just click on console or the console tab to bring up the console. So to print something in the console, we're going to use another function, console.log. So again, you don't have to worry about the syntax. Just remember that we're going to place what we want to print inside the log function like that. So let's say, welcome to JavaScript. So now this is going to be printed in the console like that. And you can see the order of how JavaScript, the order of execution. So at the beginning, we got the alert message and we don't see anything there. And then once we click on OK, then JavaScript will move to the next lines. And then it's going to show the message or print it in the console for us. Okay. Now the console is very important in JavaScript, and that's one of the very useful tools provided by Google Chrome, because it will help us test our code and debug it as well. Now, let's say that we've got an error in our code. So instead of console.log, I write log without O. So now if I run my code, I'm going to get an error right there. And it's telling me that in line 5, there is an error. So this is something very important. So just remember how to debug your code. If you run your JavaScript code and something unexpected happens, then you would need to go straight away to the console and check if there are any errors there. Like in our example here, we've got an error in line 5, and it's saying here that's console.lg is not a function, because lg obviously is not a function. It needs to be log like that. And now it's supposed to work. Now, a quick note about syntax. JavaScript is quite tolerant when it comes to the syntax compared to other languages. So, for example, later on in the next chapter, you will learn variables. So, without diving into details, to declare a variable and set it to a new value, you can do something like this. So for now, you don't have to worry about the syntax. But this is the correct syntax of declaring a variable and initializing it to a value, which you will learn in the next chapter. Now, if you write something like this, it should work because your syntax is correct. But if you don't use the var keyword, JavaScript will tolerate that and your code will still work, although your syntax is not that good. Now, if you want to avoid this, you can use something we call strict or strict mode. Now, in strict mode, JavaScript will not allow you to do certain things like this and will not allow bad code. So if you try this, then you will get an error. It says X is not defined. So just remember how to use the strict mode if you want to make sure that your JavaScript code is secure. Now, this really helps if you're managing a team of JavaScript developers and you want them to follow strict rules when writing JavaScript. But in normal scenarios, you can still go with the normal mode, like that. And you won't get an error if you write something like this. It's still preferable that you declare your variables, and you will learn this in the next chapter. In this video, you're going to learn JavaScript variables. So, what's a variable? Let's suppose that you are building a game where the user starts with a score of 0, and then whenever they collect a coin, their score increases by 1. So, you want JavaScript to remember the score for you so that it can decide or update the score whenever the user collects a coin. So, here comes the concept of a variable. So a variable here is going to be like a container where you're going to store that piece of information, the score of your user. So your variable is going to consist of a couple of things. It's going to need a name. In our case, we can name it score. The name needs to be meaningful, and that's what you're going to use to refer to your variable inside your code. and you need a value, and that's the piece of information that you're going to store inside your variable. Okay, so our variable can be used to hold information. We can come back to our variable later on to retrieve our piece of information. We can also come back to it and update the piece of information which we stored inside the variable. So at some point your score is going to become 9, for example. Okay, so now we understood how variables work, and bear in mind that variables are one of the building blocks of any programming language. So in the next video, we're going to write JavaScript code to create a variable. In this video, you're going to write JavaScript code and create variables. So first of all, inside the projects folder, JavaScript, I'm going to create a new folder for our chapter, and I'm going to call it variables and data types. Okay, so then I'm going to open this folder using brackets. All right, so now for this video, I'm going to create a new folder for our code. So I'm going to call it variables. Okay. And then inside this folder, we're going to have a couple of files. So we're going to have an HTML file for our web page, and then we're going to have a JavaScript file for our code. So the HTML file is going to be index.html, and then the JavaScript file is going to be code.js. So inside the HTML file, we're going to use the same basic template we used earlier. Okay, so we're just going to change the title to variables and the heading to variables as well. And to link the HTML file to the JS file, we need to specify the source going to our file code.js. Okay, so let's use half the screen, okay, for brackets, and let's see our web page. Okay, so you've got a simple web page there, and we can see our heading right there. All right, so now we are ready to write code inside our JavaScript file. So first of all, we're going to declare a variable. So declaring a variable is part of the creation of the variable. So when you create a variable, first of all, a good practice is to declare it. So declaring a variable means that you just tell JavaScript to allocate some space in the memory, okay, for a new variable. So to declare a variable, we need to use the keyword var, okay, and then we're gonna have space and then the name of our variable. So I'm gonna call the variable score for now. So you can just end the statement here with a semicolon. Right, so if you remember in the previous video, we said that we need a name for our variable and we need a value for it. But for now, we just gave our variable a name and there is no value. Well, let's check if there is a value inside this variable that we just declared. So you would need to go to the console. So to go to the console, you can just go and click on this icon in Google Chrome and then go to More Tools and then Developer Tools. Okay, so in case you don't see the console, you just click on this arrow and then select console from there. Your console might show up at the bottom, okay, of the web page. You can change that by going to the dock side and changing where you want it to appear. Okay, all right. So now we want to see what's stored inside this new variable. You can do that in the JavaScript file straight away using console.log, and inside the parentheses you can write your variable like that. So console is a global object. Don't worry for now about the objects concept. We're going to cover objects later, but for now just remember that console is a global object and it's got methods and functions inside it or attached to it, and one of them is log. So this function will take any parameter and it will just print it on your screen. So if you give it a variable, it's going to interpret the value of that variable. Okay, so let's see what we get. So you got undefined. So this is how our program runs. So we started from line 1, we've got a comment, then we've got a variable declaration right there. So we declared the variable and then we printed the variable in the console right there. And you can see that undefined comes from line number 3. So our variable is undefined. So undefined is actually a value, okay, and it's actually a separate type. It's one of the types that we're going to cover. It's just like a number or a string, and we're going to cover that later. So when you declare a variable without giving it any value, it's got actually a value called undefined. Okay, so now let's try another declaration or another variable, and this time let's do something different. So we want to declare a variable and also give it a value. This is what we call initialize the variable. Okay, so just remember that when you declare the variable without giving it a value, it got initialized automatically to undefined. So now we're going to control that. We're going to create another variable. Let's call it lives left. Let's suppose that's inside your game. Your user has got 3 lives left at the beginning. So, and we want to initialize that to 3. Okay, so what does it mean? So we declared a variable and we gave it an initial value of 3. So the equal sign here is not the same as the mathematics equal sign. This equal sign is an assignment sign. So this will assign a value to your variable. Okay, so now let's print our variable and see what we get. And we've got 3. Okay, so now let's change the value of our variable. So you can go back to any variable and just change the value. So what we're going to do now, we're going to reassign, okay, a value to our variable. Okay, so to do that, you don't need the var keyword because the var keyword is only used to declare a variable. You can now just write the name of your variable straight away, and then you can use the equal sign, which is the assignment operator, and then you can choose a new value. So let's say that your user just got hit by a monster and they lose 1 life, and the new value of their variable lives left is 2. Okay, so now let's do the same thing and print our variable in the console and see what we get. And we've got 2. Now there is another way of checking the value of your variables using the console straight away. So you can do that by typing inside the console the name of your variable, okay, and then clicking enter, and that gives you the value of your variable. Okay, so now before we finish this video, let's get introduced to constants. So a constant is a special type of variables, okay? It's a variable that you cannot change. So let's create an example. So you need the JavaScript keyword const, okay, for constant, and then you can choose a name for your variable. First name, for example. Okay, so it's more or less the same way we declare a typical variable, but the keyword you need to use is const. Okay, so this variable cannot change. So you can't come back to it and change it. And usually you need this for fixed parameters inside your program, especially when you're developing the program with other people inside in your team, and you want to make sure that nobody can change this variable. Okay, then you use a constant. Now that you know how to create JavaScript variables and assign values to them, you would need to be aware of some rules that you need to follow when naming your variables. Okay, so first of all, when you name your variable, you need to use letters. So your variable name can contain letters. You can also have digits inside your variable, okay, but you can't have a digit at the beginning of the name of your variable. So you have to start with a letter. You're also allowed to have underscores, okay, or dollar signs inside your variable or at the beginning of your variable. Okay, this is completely valid. So now the name of your variable is case sensitive. So what does it mean? So this means that if you look at your variable lives left and you try to console.log lives left with capital letters, you will get an error saying that this variable is not defined. This is because that one and that one are completely different variables, because JavaScript is case sensitive. Okay, and finally, when you name your variable, you're not allowed to use a JavaScript reserved keyword. So a reserved keyword is something like var, const, something which means something in JavaScript. So these names are not allowed to be used when you name your variable. So I'll provide a list of reserved keywords later on for your reference. Now that you understand how to create and name your variables, you would need to understand what's going on the memory side for you to have a proper understanding of JavaScript. Alright, so when you create a variable x and you initialize it to 1, for example, something needs to happen on the memory side, because we said that JavaScript will need to allocate some space in memory for your value 1. Okay, so what's going on exactly? Well, let's have a look at the memory of your computer. It consists of bytes like this. So we're going to start with byte 0, byte 1, and then it continues until the end of your computer's memory. So we're talking here about the volatile memory, the memory used by your computer to run programs. This is not the memory which is used by your computer to store a movie, for example. So 1 byte will consist of 8 bits. A bit is the smallest piece of information that your computer can handle. So this is usually referring to 0 or 1, for example. So to have a proper understanding of this, 1 gigabyte is 1024 megabytes, and 1 megabyte is 1024 bytes, and a byte is 8 bits. Okay, so each of these bytes is going to have its own address. Okay, so when you create a variable x, x will need to point to one of these addresses in your computer's memory. Okay, and that's the start of x. Basically, x is going to occupy a few bytes inside your computer. So in our example here, the green bytes are occupied by our variable x. So we start with that byte, and then that one, until that one. So each of these bytes has got its own address. So basically, x is going to occupy a range of addresses inside your computer's memory. And that number of addresses, okay, will depend on the size of x. So numbers, for example, in JavaScript will occupy 8 bytes, which is the equivalent of 64 bits. Okay, so now hopefully you have a proper understanding of how JavaScript handles the memory side in your computer when dealing with variables. In this video, you're going to start looking at JavaScript data types. So in JavaScript, you're going to find many data types. So first, we're going to start with the primitives. So what is a primitive? A primitive data type is a data type that cannot accept any property or method to be attached to it. So what does it mean exactly? Well, if you remember, earlier, we used the console global object. So the console is an object, and consequently, it has got properties and methods attached to it. Unlike an object, a number, for example, is only a value. It does not have any properties or methods attached to it. So a data type like that, which has got no properties or methods that can be attached to it, is called a primitive. Okay? So let's check the type of our variable x. We know it's a number, but let's print that in the console. So to do that, we're going to use an operator called typeOf. There are many operators in JavaScript. You're going to find a list of operators in the resources of the course. So typeOf space x. So this will print the type of our variable x. So let's try that. Okay, so x is a number. Okay, so you can also have fractional numbers in JavaScript. So let's define a variable y and set it to 2.4. Okay. You can also use some mathematical expressions. So if you define a variable z and you want z to be equal to 5.3 multiplied by 10 to the 8th power, okay, there's an easy way of doing that in JavaScript. You just type 5.3 E8. Okay, so if you print z, this is what you're going to get. All right, so now if you remember, we said that JavaScript will allocate 64 bits for any integer or any number that you create in JavaScript. So this has got a consequence. So inside 64 bits, there has to be a maximum number that you can store in JavaScript, because you only have 64 bits for numbers. Okay, so let's find out what that maximum number is. And also you're going to find what the minimum is. Okay, so let's define a variable I or max, where we're going to store that number. So you're going to use the number global object. So number is also a global object, just like console, and it's got properties and methods. So one of the properties of this object is called max value. So this value is going to return the maximum numeric value representable in JavaScript. Okay. So let's print max. And this is the maximum number you can have in JavaScript. Okay. And similarly, there is a minimum number in JavaScript. And it's going to correspond to min value, okay, which is also a property of the global object number. And let's print that. and this is the smallest number in JavaScript. Just bear in mind that when we speak about the smallest number in JavaScript here, we're talking about the absolute value. This doesn't include any sign, okay? So we're talking about the smallest positive number. Okay, so in the next video, we're gonna look at JavaScript arithmetics. Now that you know how to store numbers in your variables, you would need to get introduced to arithmetic operations in JavaScript. You will need these to do things like increasing the score of a user in a game or performing a transaction in your projects. So let's have a look at these arithmetic operations. So first, let's create a variable a and set it to the sum of two numbers. So if you print a, you will get 13 as expected. Okay. If you want, you can try this in the console straight away and you will get the result as you would expect. Now let's try something else. Let's set the value of a to a new value, the products of 3 and 4. So if you print a, you will get 12. Now you can use other variables when performing your operations. So let's take y minus x. All right. Now let's define a new variable b and set it to 3. Now you can assign a new value to b using b itself. So for instance, you can take b and add to it 2. So if you print b, you will get 5 because you updated the value of b to the old value of b plus 2, and that gives you 5. Now there is an easy way of writing this b equals b plus 2. You can say to JavaScript, take b and add to it something that is equal to 2. So plus equal means take this number and add to it something that is equal to that value. So let's comment that and try again, and we get exactly the same thing. Now if you try b plus equal 1, it means that we're going to update the value of b to its own value plus 1. So if you print b, here you get the old value, which is 5 plus 1, that gives you 6. Now there is another easier way of writing b plus equal 1. You can just write b plus plus. So what does it mean? It just means that you're going to take b and add 1 to it. That's what plus plus means. And you're going to get exactly the same results. Okay. You can do the same thing with minus. So if you say b minus equal 1, that means take b and reduce it by 1. So let's try that. Here we go. Again, there is an easy way of writing that. You can just write b minus minus. Instead of minus equals 1, you can just write minus minus, and that gives you exactly the same thing. All right. So there is another operation that you can add right there. So you might want to divide 12 by 4, and that gives you 3. So we covered more or less the basic arithmetic operations in JavaScript. In the next video, we're going to cover operator precedence. In this video, you're going to learn operator precedence in JavaScript. So let's start with an example to understand what it means. So let's define a variable c and set it to 4 multiplied by 5 plus 3. So if you want to calculate this, there are two ways of doing that. You might want to multiply 4 by 5, that gives you 20, and then add 3, giving you 23. Otherwise, you might want to add 5 and 3 first, giving you 8, and then multiplying the result by 4. That will give you 32. Now, if you follow the mathematics arithmetic rules, you know that the multiplication needs to happen first. And that's exactly how JavaScript would do it. Because if you print C, you will get 23. Now, the fact that the multiplication happens first means that it precedes the addition operation. And this is what we call operator precedence. The multiplication operator precedes the addition operator. All right, now if you want to change this, you can use parentheses, meaning that if you want the addition to happen first, you can just place 5 plus 3 inside parentheses, like that. And that will give you 32. All right, now let's have another example. And let's do that using the plus plus operator. But this time, we're going to do something slightly different. So you're going to have the plus plus operator before our variable c, not after the variable. So if you remember, the way we did this before was variable and then plus plus, and this meant that we want to add 1 to our variable. Now we're going to write plus plus, then c. So let's print c and see what we get. Well, c now is 33. Now, let's define, so instead of saying plus plus c, we're going to define a variable d and set it to plus plus c. So let's see what's going on here. So we've got an equal sign, and then we've got a plus plus sign. So which one is going to precede the other? Well, let's print d and see what we get. All right. So d is 33 as well. So what does it mean? So this means that the plus plus happened first because c turned to 33, and then the equal operator came straight after that, leading to d holding the value of 33. So in this scenario, the plus plus preceded the equal operator. Now, if you try something different, let's have another variable e and set it to c++ instead of plus plus c. So now, if you print c and then print e, what do you expect to get? Well, C++ is definitely going to change C to C+1. So at the moment, C is 33. So you expect this to turn 34, right? Okay. Now, with regards to E, do you think E is going to be the old value of C, which is 33, or is it going to be 34? Well, let's try that. So C is 34 because we have C++, but E is still 33. And why is that? That's because the equal operator preceded this time the plus plus operator. So when you read this in JavaScript, you're going to read E equal C. That's going to happen first. So at the moment, we haven't reached this bit yet. So at the moment, C is still the equal, is still holding the old value 33. So E equals C will lead to E storing the old value of C, and that's 33. And then we're going to have plus plus, and then C is going to change afterwards to 34 after assigning the old value of C to E. Okay, so these are only a couple of examples about operator precedence. In the course resources, you're going to find a link to a list of different rules of operator precedence in JavaScript. In this video, you're going to learn more JavaScript arithmetic operators as well as some special numbers. So let's start with the remainder operator. So this operator will give you the remainder of a division of two numbers. So let's define a variable f and set it to the remainder of dividing 17 by 3. So the percentage sign is our remainder operator. So if you print f, that will give you the remainder of the division. Because we know that 17 is 3 multiplied by 5, and the remainder is 2. Now let's have a look at another operator, the exponent operator. So if we define a variable g and set it to 3 star star 3, this operator star star or multiply twice is the exponent operator. So this means that we want 3 to be multiplied by itself 3 times. So if you say 3 multiply 4, this means 3 multiplied by itself 4 times, or 3 to the power of 4. So it will return the base to the exponent power. So let's print g. And we get 81. All right, now let's cover a couple of special numbers. So first of all, let's have a look at infinity. So this is a special number, so you can store this value inside a variable. So let's define a variable h and set it to infinity. So if you print h, you're going to get infinity. Well, what does it mean? So infinity is the same number you find in maths as infinity. So this is the results that you would get when trying something like a number divided by 0. That will give you infinity. Now another special value is none. This means not a number. So you will get this when you perform a mathematical operation giving you no meaningful result. For instance, if you define a variable and set it to 0 divided by 0, so this does not give us any meaningful results. So no meaningful results. And if you print this variable, you will get none, which stands for not a number. Now let's have a look at the power method, and you will see why we want to tackle this one right here after going through the not a number special value. So if you define another variable j and set it to a number to the power of something, so you can do that either by using the exponent operator. Otherwise, you can use the math objects, and this is a global object, just like the console, and we're going to come back later to the maths objects in detail when we cover objects in the object chapter. So this math object has got a method called power, just like that. Okay, so it's going to return the base to the exponent's power, that is base exponent. So we're going to place the base as the first parameter of our function, and the second parameter of the function is going to be the power. Okay, so if you want to print j, you will get the results. So you're getting a really big number. Now, what if we define a number using the power method and we get a really, really big number beyond the maximum one that JavaScript can handle? Remember, we had a maximum number that you can use in JavaScript, and that maximum number was number.maxValue. Now, let's say that we want to exceed that number. What are we going to get? And now you'll see why we are tackling the power method right here. So let's define another variable and call it h or l, and set it to math.power of the base 2 to the power 2000, for example, something really big. And now let's print L, or let's call it K. So what do you expect? Well, we get infinity. So basically any number that is greater than the max value is going to be interpreted by JavaScript as infinity, because JavaScript just can't handle that number for you. So it will just turn it to infinity. All right, now let's have a look at a function which will help us pass strings into numbers. So and return an integer. So let's say that you've got a variable, okay, number, storing something like 3, but not as a number, as a string. We'll cover strings later, but for now, just remember a string is between two quotes, okay, single quotes or double quotes. So you've got a project and you want to transform this value into a real number, because at the moment it's a string. So there is a function you can use, it's called parse integer. So if I print parse integer of number, okay, I'm going to get 3. Is 3 a number or is it a string? So let's check. So you're going to check the type of this, and we're getting a number. So parseInt is a useful function that you can use for this purpose, changing a string into an integer. Now let's say that you're using parseInteger on something that cannot be changed or transformed to a number. So instead of number like that, so let's say we want to transform something that is not a number. Okay, it's a string, but we cannot transform it to a number. So what are you going to get? You get not a number. And the type of not a number is still actually a number. Okay, so parseInt will try to transform your string to a number. If it succeeds, it will give you a number. Otherwise, it will just give you a not a number value, which is also a number if you check the type of it. So let me just go back there and just an extra line there just to make our code clear. Okay, so it returned 3 there. The type is a number, and it returned not a number there, and the type is also a number. In this video, you're going to learn a new data type, strings. So a string is a sequence of characters which you place inside single quotes or double quotes. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. So let's define a variable job and set it to web developer. So this is a string because it is a sequence of characters and we place them inside single quotes. Let's define another one. This is another string, okay? But instead of single quotes, you can choose to have double quotes. Okay. So now let's define another string and call it greeting. And let's set it to hello, glad to see you. So we've got a string and it's inside single quotes, but we're going to get an error because of this single quote inside our string. So if you've got a single quote inside a string made with single quotes, then you would need to escape that single quote using a backslash like that. And now you're not going to get an error. Right? So that's how you escape the normal process and treat any quotation marks, okay, as a punctuation mark, if you like. All right, now let's have a look at some special characters. So you might want to have a new line inside your string. Okay. So for instance, let's have a new value or new variable quote, and let's say this is a new line. So if you print this string in your console, this is what you get. But let's say that we want a new line to start right there. So between is and a, we're going to add a special character, and that's going to be \n, and this will give us a new line. Now let's say that you want to have a tab instead of a new line. So let's set our quote variable to a new value, saying here is a tab, and you want the tab to appear right there. So just before A, we're going to have a tab. So to do that, we're going to have, again, a backslash, but this time we're going to have T for tab. Let's try. And you've got a tab right there. All right, so now let's move to something else. Let's have a quick look at concatenation. So concatenation will allow you to concatenate two strings. So for instance, let's define a couple of strings, first name and last name. So now you want to concatenate these strings and store them inside a new variable called full name. So to concatenate strings, you can just take the string and add it like you do with numbers to the other string, like that. So now if we print full name, this is what you're gonna get. Now let's say that we want a space between Bill and Gates. So just before the last name, we're going to add another string. And we're going to have a space inside it. So now let's try and see. Okay, so that looks better. You can even add a dot at the end if you like that. And that looks even better. Okay, now let's have a quick look at some methods and properties that we can use with strings. So again, these are going to be covered in detail in the objects chapter, but for now we just going to have a quick look for awareness reasons. Okay. So these methods, they're going to work with strings, although strings are primitive, but they inherit these methods from a global objects, or which we'll cover later. It's the string objects, and we're going to cover this objects later. Okay, so let me just write a comment here. So these methods will work with the primitive type, okay, and also with the object type. Okay, will be covered in detail later. So for instance, you can print the length of a string. So let's define a string, call it S, and let's say apple. So you may want to see the length of apple. So to do that, the property to use is called length. And that will give you the length of your string. 5, and that's 5 because we have 5 characters inside apple. Now, let's say you want to know the character at position 2. Okay, so you're going to use the character at method. So position 2 will be that one. So that's position 0, position 1, and position 2. We always start with position 0. So let's see what we get. We get letter B. Now let's try something else. You can check the index of a certain letter. So let's say index of letter L. So it's going to be index of. And then you specify which letter you want to see. So letter L is at index 3, because if we start from 0, 1, 2, we end up in the 3rd position for L. And finally, let's have a quick look at the last index of a letter. So let's say that you want to know the last index of P, meaning you want to know the index of the last letter B, because we have 2 letters P there, and you want to have the index of the last one. So to have that, you need to use the last index of method. And then you specify P, and that will give you the index of the last one. okay, which is 2. So 0, 1, 2. So these are only a few methods that which are inherited from the global object string, and we're going to come back to these later in detail. In this video, you're going to learn a new data type, booleans. So what is a boolean? A boolean is another primitive data type which will be either true or false. Basically, it stores a logical value. So let's create an example and see how it works. So I'm going to create a couple of variables x and y and set each one of them to a number. Now we want to answer the question, is x greater than y? Well, to do this, I'm going to create another variable z where we're going to store the answer. So to do this, you can just write x greater than y, like this. So now let's print the value of z and see what we get. So we get false. If you like, you can also have this inside a parenthesis, but it's absolutely fine to have it just like that. So now let's change greater than to less than. And the value of z now is true. You can also try equal equal, which means is the value of x equal to the value of y? And that gives us false. You can also try triple equal, and that is slightly different from equal equal. Triple equal will be true if the value of x is the same as the value of y and also they are of the same type. Bear in mind that sometimes you might have variables which have different types, but they actually have the same value. And we'll see examples later. Okay, so for now, let's just keep this, and we've got our z equal to true. So now this is a quick introduction to booleans. All right, in the next video, you're going to see logical operators. In this video, you're going to learn logical operators. So what is a logical operator? So let's have a look. So instead of answering one question, this time you want to answer two questions, and you want to check if both the answers are true. So let's set z to a new value. So we're going to check two conditions here, and we're going to check if both those conditions are true. So I'm going to check if z is, or x is less than y, and also x is greater than 0. So we've got two conditions here, and we want to check if both of them are true. So to write and, we're going to use ampersands like this. So you need two of them. Okay, so now let's print the value of z and see what we get. All right, so and is a logical operator. It's an operator that we use with booleans. So a boolean and a boolean. So the output or the result of and, if you've got two booleans, is going to be true if both of them are true. If one of them is not true, then the result is going to be false. Let's see. Okay, so you can see that one is true because 3 is less than 5, and that one is not correct because 3 is greater than 0. All right, now let's check another example. So let's set the value of z this time to false or true. So now instead of using and, we want to use or. So to write or, you need 2 vertical bars like that. So this means or. So false or true. So if you've got the or operator, then only one condition needs to be true so that the result is true. So in our case, if you print z, you will get true, because at least one of these two is true, and that's the one. If both of them are false, then you're going to get false. Okay. Now, there is another operator. It's the opposite. So the opposite of false is going to be true. And the opposite can be referred to using an exclamation mark. So this exclamation mark means opposite of. Okay, opposite of true is false. So the opposite of x less than 10 is going to be false, because x less than 10 is true, and the opposite of true is false. Alright, so in the next video, we're going to cover operator precedence. In this video, you're going to learn operator precedence with booleans. So let's set the value of z to a new value. So let's go for false and true or true. So what do you think the result of this is going to be? So there are 2 ways to get the result. So you might think about this as false and true, which will give you false, and then there's going to be false or true, and that will give us true. Otherwise, you might say, well, actually I'm going to leave false for now, and I'm going to do true or true, which will give you true, and then you're going to say that's going to be true and false, and that's going to give me false. And that will give you different results. So if you write this like that in JavaScript, what do you think the result is going to be? So let's print z and see what we get. Well, we get true. Basically, JavaScript will give the priority to the operator and. So the operator and is going to be executed first, and then the result of that is going to be combined with the or operator. So and is stronger than or. So this is only one example. You will get a full picture of the operator precedence for booleans in the operator precedence reference that you can find in the resources of the course. In this video, you're going to learn the unary operator. So what is the unary operator? Let's suppose that you want to give z a value, but you've got the choice between 2 values depending on the condition x greater than 4. So you're going to check if x is greater than 4. If that's true, then you give z value 1, otherwise you give it value 2. So to do this, you can check first the condition x greater than 4. So that's the condition. So the condition is going to be followed by a question mark. So this means that you're telling JavaScript to check whether this is true or false. If this is true, then you're going to give z a value. So let's say I want to give it the value pass. Otherwise, you're going to give it another value, fail. So the first value is the value that you're going to give z if the condition is true. And the second value, which comes right after the colon, is going to be the one you give to z if the condition is not verified. So let's check the value of z. Well, we get fail because x is not greater than 4. If we change this to x greater than 2, then we get pass. And that's about the unary operator. In this video, you're going to learn how to use logical operators with non-booleans. So far, you learned how to use logical operators with booleans. You give the operator a couple of booleans and you expect a boolean as a result. Now let's see how to do this with non-booleans and also understand why you would do that. So let's give our variable z a new value. So we're gonna set it to true and true to start with. Okay, so for now I'm gonna keep the first element as true and I'm gonna check the results depending on the value of the second parameter. So this one will give us true because both of them are true. Now if I change this to false, I'm going to get false because the second one is false. And we know that an expression with an AND operator will be true if both elements are true. So you might have noticed now that the result of this expression will depend only on the second parameter if you are sure that the first parameter is true. So JavaScript will allow you to have a second parameter not as a boolean but as a string, for example. So let's set that to apple, for example, and see what we're gonna get. And we get apple because basically the result of this expression is going to be whatever we have in the second parameter because the first parameter is true. Now, if the first parameter is not a boolean, if we set it to a number, for example, let's see what we get. Well, we still get apple. Well, the reason why is because 1 can be converted in JavaScript to true. This is what we call type coercion. When you give JavaScript a logical expression with one of the elements which is not a boolean, then JavaScript will try to coerce that element into a boolean. We will cover coercion later on in detail, but for now just remember that JavaScript is able to coerce elements to different types. And you can check the corresponding value of a certain non-boolean when you convert it to a boolean yourself just by typing something like console.log is 1 equal to true, for example, and you get true. So actually 1 can be coerced to true. Let's try that with 0. Doesn't work, okay, because 0 is not equal to true, but let's see if 0 can be coerced to false. Yes, it's true. Even in this expression here, when JavaScript reads the double equal sign and it finds a number there, then it coerces or tries to coerce the number into a boolean. Let's try with something else. Let's try with a string. This is not false. Let's try with true. Okay, so actually 1 can be coerced as a string, can be coerced to true as well. Let's try another string, banana. Well, it can't be coerced to true. But let's see if it can be coerced to false. It can't be coerced to false either. Well, let's check what happens when we try banana here instead of 1. So we said that if that can be coerced to true, then the result of z is going to be the second parameter. But let's try with banana. Well, we get the second parameter. We still get the second parameter. Why? So the rule is, if the first parameter cannot be coerced to false, then you get the second parameter. So what does it mean? So JavaScript will check the first parameter, it'll try to coerce it. If it gives false, then the result is going to be false. If JavaScript cannot coerce the first element to false, then it will just give you the second element. Okay. All right. So now let's move to another example. Let's set z to false or true. So we know that the result of this is going to be true because one of the elements is true. Now, if you say false or false, it's going to be false because both of these are false. So all the time, you get the same result as the second element if you keep the first one as false. Now let's try false or apple and print z. Again, you're going to get apple, and that's happening for the same reason as earlier. So when you get or there with a second parameter as a string, then JavaScript will just check the first parameter. If the first parameter is false, then it will just give you the second parameter if it's a string, for example. So why would we need this? Well, let's say that instead of false, you've got something that is not a boolean. Let's say we've got a variable that is not defined. So let's call our variable fruits and let's just declare it right there. But we don't give it any value. So what is the value of fruits? We have just declared it. We didn't set it to any value. It hasn't been initialized. So what do you expect? It's going to be undefined. So now, fruits is undefined. Undefined, can it be coerced to false? Let's check. Yes, it can. So now we've got a logical expression with or. The first element can be coerced to false, so JavaScript will just give us the second element. So when do we use this in our projects? So sometimes you want to set z to the value of a variable, but you're not sure if that variable is already set or not. So as a callback, you add or something else. So first JavaScript is going to try to set your variable z to the value of that variable. If it can't find it, or if it coerces to false, then it will just use that variable as a callback. Okay, now let's try something else. So instead of fruit and or apple, let's try an empty string. Well, what do you think? Is z going to be apple? Or is it going to be an empty string? Or is it going to be false? let's check the results. Okay, so in this case, the empty string has been coerced to false, because if you try this, it will give you true. So that has been coerced to false, so JavaScript just threw the second element. All right, now let's try empty string and false. So first, JavaScript is gonna check the first element. If it coerces to true, then it will give us the second one. All right, what if it doesn't coerce to true? Well, in our case, it actually coerces to false. Is it gonna return false? Let's check. Well, surprisingly, it's actually returned the empty string itself. Why is that? That's because the empty string can be coerced to false. So it's just going to return the empty string itself. You will get the same result if you replace the empty string by 0, for example. 0 can be coerced to false. And so you're going to get 0. All right. So just remember that when you get an AND statement or expression with a couple of elements which are not booleans, JavaScript will look at the first one. If the first one coerces to true, then it's going to return the second one. If the first one coerces to false, then it will give the first element. If the first element is false itself, then it will just give false. Now, when you've got an OR statement, then JavaScript will check the first element. If the first element can coerce to false, it will give you the second one. In this video, you're going to learn two more data types, null and undefined. Well, let's start with undefined, since that's the one you're the most familiar with. So, if you remember, creating a variable x without initializing it to any value will set the value of x to undefined automatically. So let's print x. We get undefined. Now, let's check the type of x. And we get undefined. Well, that means that undefined is actually a type itself. So it's not only a value, but it's also a type. And that's one of the primitive types in JavaScript. All right, now let's move to null. So I'm going to create another variable y and set it to null. So what does it mean? Well, the value null means that your variable has got no value. So that's what it means in JavaScript. So to make it clear, so null can be assigned as a value, as a representation of no value. Make sense? Okay, so let's print our variable y, and we get null. Now, we said that null is a type itself. Yes, it is. Now, if you print the type of y, what would you expect? Do you expect null? Let's see. Well, you get an object. Why is that? Well, actually, we expect this to return null, but it's giving us objects. That's due to the way that type_of is built in JavaScript. In JavaScript, type_of is built in a way that's such as if you give it a variable with a value null, it returns an object. And some people argue that this is a bug, which is due to how JavaScript has been implemented initially. So for now, just remember that null is a type itself, and just bear in mind that type_of will return an object if you give it null. Alright, so in the next video, we're going to cover type coercion. In this video, you're going to learn type coercion in JavaScript. Type coercion happens when JavaScript converts a value from a certain type to another. And you've seen before that this happened mainly when we applied a logical operator to non-booleans. So when you apply an operator to the wrong type, JavaScript will convert that type using certain rules, and these rules are not always what you would expect. So let's have a look at a few examples. So let's define a variable z and set it to the sum of a string and a number. So now, if you check, there are no errors in the console, which means that whatever we've written is valid. Now, if we print the value of z, we will get 15. Now, if we print the type of z, we will get a string. Well, what happened here is that JavaScript converted 5 to a string, and then it just concatenated the string 1 and the string 5, and they gave us 15. Now let's try another example. If we set the value of z to a string minus a number, let's see what we get. So the value of z this time is -4, and it's a number. Well, what happened is that JavaScript converted this time the string from 1 to a number 1. So it's converted this to that. While in that scenario, it's converted 5 to string 5. All right. Let's try another one. So instead of a number inside quotes, I'm going to write characters like that and multiply that by 2. So now let's see if JavaScript is going to convert strings to numbers or numbers to strings. Well, the result here of z is not a number. So we get that because JavaScript could not convert that to a number. Multiplication will not work with strings. So JavaScript has got to convert everything it finds to numbers. So it tried to convert that to a number. It didn't succeed. So the result is going to be not a number. And remember, not a number is also a number. All right. Let's try another example. So let's multiply 2 by null. And let's check the results. Well, we get 0, and it's a number, obviously. So we get 0 because, again, we've got a multiplication operation. So JavaScript has got to try to convert everything to numbers. So we've got already a number there, and JavaScript is actually able to convert null to 0. So 2 multiplied by 0 gives 0. All right. Now let's try this with logical operators again. We've already done a few, but let's have a quick look at some others. So I'm going to print 0 double equal false. So we're checking here if 0 is equal to false. So on the left hand side we've got a number. On the right hand side we've got a boolean. So since we've got a logical operator, it works only with booleans, so JavaScript is going to try to convert that to a boolean. So let's see what we get. We get true because JavaScript managed to convert 0 to false. And then false equals false is correct, is true, and we get true. Now you can try the same thing with null or undefined or even an empty string. And you will find that each of them will give you a different result. So null equals false. Well, this doesn't give us true because null cannot be converted to false. Similarly, undefined cannot be converted to false, but an empty string, yes, it can be converted to false. So let me just write these two at the end, just for clarity. All right. Now, there is something about null and undefined. If you find them in an expression like this, well, where you compare them to something else, they will always give you false, unless you try something, which is undefined equals null. So let's try that. If you try this, then you get true. And that's the only case where you get true comparing undefined to something or null to something. Okay, so undefined compared to something else rather other than null will always give false. And the same thing applies to null. If you compare null to anything other than undefined, you will get false. But you will still get true if you compare undefined to itself or null to itself. All right. But there is one exception to comparing something to its own image. It's when you compare none to none. You will get false. And just remember this one. If you compare not a number to not a number, this will always give you false. In this video, you're going to get introduced to JavaScript objects. So what is an object? So far, we covered only the primitive types in JavaScript, and we said that a primitive is a value that does not accept any property or method attached to it. Now, bear in mind that this video is going to be an introduction to objects, and it's going to be an overview of objects. Then you're going to learn more about objects and objects-oriented programming in the advanced sections of this course. Now, we're looking at objects as a quick overview. So let's create an example. So an object is going to be a collection of properties. You will see that it's going to be properties and methods as well, but for now, let's keep it simple. So we are looking at a collection. So unlike a primitive, which is only a value, an object is a collection of properties or a collection of values. So let's create a variable myPhone and store an object inside it. So the object is going to be placed inside curly brackets. So this is only one way of creating objects. We'll cover other ways later in the advanced sections. So let's start with the first property. So we need a name for our property, and then colon, and then a value for it. So our first property is a string. The name of the property is make, and you don't need to place that inside quotes or anything. You just need to write it like that. Now let's add another property. So you need a comma. Let's go for the model. For example, iPhone 7, for example. And then comma, another property, the warranty. 12 for 12 months. So that's a string, and then we've got a number. And let's add a final one, the color, and let's go for gold. Okay, so you can use the American spelling or the UK spelling as you like. All right, so now we've got an object. Let's print our objects in the console and see what we get. So you can see that the console shows our objects, so you can see all the properties with their corresponding values, and if you expand it, you can see each property and the corresponding value in a more readable way. And you will notice that the order of the properties is following the alphabetical order, not the same order that we used when we defined our objects. Okay, now let's print only one property of the object. So to access a property, you can just use dot following the variable name, and then you can choose the property that you like, and that will print that specific property. All right. There are other ways of accessing properties, and we'll cover them later, so you don't have to worry now. Now, let's change a property. So to change a property, you just access it. So let's change the model, for example. So you're going to access the property and then set it to a new value. So let's change that to iPhone 6. And let's print our phone again. And now you can see that the model has changed. Now you can add a new property if you like. And you can do that by selecting the object and then dot new property, and then setting the value of the new property. So let's say the storage, set the storage to 64 gigabytes, for instance. Okay, and let's print the phone again. And you can see that we've got a new property, storage, and you can see the value of that property. Now you can also delete a property. And to do that, you just use the delete keyword, and then you select the property which you would like to delete, like that. Okay, and now let's print the phone again. And you can see that the property storage has just disappeared. All right, so now that gives you a quick overview about creating objects, manipulating them, adding properties, and so on. Now let's do something interesting. So away from objects. Okay, something interesting. So I'm going to go back to primitives. So I'm going to define a couple of variables, x and y, and set each one of them to a number. So I'm going to set x to 1, and then I'm going to say, well, I want y to be the same, to have the same value as x. All right. So what do you think the value of y is going to be? Well, y is going to be 1 as well, because y is equal to x. Do you agree? Okay. So y stores value 1. Now let's change the value of x. So I'm going to set or assign a new value to x, 2 for example. So do you think the value of y is going to change? Well, let's print y. So what do you think? Is y going to be 1 or 2? It's going to be 1. The reason is we set y to the value of x in that line, and the value of x at that stage was 1. So y is going to have the value 1. Now, if you change the value of x afterwards, that will not affect y. All right? Okay, so now let's move to objects. So we did that with x and y as primitives. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing with objects and see what we get. So I'm going to create a new object, call it my other phone, and I'm going to set the value of that object to the same value as our first object. All right, so now if we print the new object, you're going to get the same value as our first object. Okay, they're the same. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change my phone I'm going to set the color property, for example, to gray, for example. So now you know that the value of my phone is going to change. If you print my phone, you expect the new property to have a new value. Right? So that's my phone, and you can see the color of the object my phone is gray. Now, if we print my other phone, what do you think? Do you think my other phone's color is going to be gray, or is it still going to be gold? Let's see. Well, it's gray. So the difference between this scenario and that scenario is that when we changed x after we set the value of y to the old value of x, we came back to y and we found that y is still the old value of x. Now, when we did that with objects, we set the new object's value to our old object, and then we changed our old object, and then we realized when we printed our new object, my other phone, that the change has been reflected in our new object as well. Why is that? Well, the reason is because objects, they refer or they point to a reference. So what does it mean? If you look at primitives and you define a variable x and you set it to y, to 1, then inside your computer, you're going to have a space in memory allocated to the value of x. Now, when you define y and you set it to the value of x, y as a new variable is still going to have its own memory space. And inside that memory space, you're going to store the new value of x, which is 1. So you end up with two memory spaces, one allocated for the value of x and one allocated for the value of y. Now, when you do the same thing with objects and you set the value of one object to the same value as the other object, actually, in the computer memory, both objects, they're going to point to the same reference in memory. Meaning that if you change one object, you're going to change details in that same reference in memory. So if you set my other phone's value to be the same as my phone value, then both objects are going to point to the same address in memory. And any changes that happen to my phone are gonna take place in that allocated space. And any change that happens to my other phone is going to happen in the same allocated space. So any property you change inside my phone is going to be reflected in the value of my other phone because they are pointing to the same place in memory. So that's how it works for objects. So again, you set the value of an object to be equal to the value of another object, then both objects start pointing to the same address in memory. Alright, now just bear in mind that this happens only if you set the value of an object to be equal to another object. This will not work if you create both objects separately and you give them properties like that. So if you created another object, my phone 2, like this, okay, even though the properties inside this phone are the same in values as the properties of the other phone, changing that phone is not going to have any impact on the other one because you haven't written anything where you set the value of one of them to be equal to the other one. In this video, you're going to get introduced to arrays. So again, this is going to be a quick overview about arrays, and then we'll see more details later on in the advanced sections. So an array is a list of elements. It's just like objects, but slightly different in terms of syntax and way of use. So let's create an example shopping list. So we're going to store an array inside this variable. So arrays, they go inside brackets like this, and then you're going to have elements inside the array. You can have strings, numbers, any type you like. So I'm going to use strings for now in this example. And to separate elements, you just need a comma like this. And let's go for milk. So now we've got an array. Let's print it in our console. And you can see in the console, we've got an array of 3 elements, and you can see the elements inside it. And if you expand it, then it gives you the index of each element and the corresponding value. We start with index 0 and we carry on like that. So the first index is always index 0. Now let's say that you want to access a specific element inside your array, for instance, the element of index 1. So to do that, you just write the name of your array, bracket or brackets, and then the index that you want. All right. Now arrays, they inherit some properties from a global object which is called array, which we'll cover later on. You don't have to worry about that. So some of these properties is the length of the array. So to get the length of the array, you just use the name of the array, then dot length. So that's a property of arrays. So let's see, the length of our array is 3 because we've got 3 elements in there. So that was a quick overview about arrays in JavaScript. You will understand more and learn more about arrays in the advanced sections. in this chapter, you're going to learn conditional and looping in JavaScript. This means that you're going to be able to write code and tell JavaScript to execute certain instructions depending on certain conditions. So in this video, we're going to start with the if statement. So let's have a look at one example. Let's say that you are developing a website where users are able to purchase items. Before a purchase takes place, you check the balance of the user to make sure that they have enough funds. So let's define a couple of variables: balance and price of the item. So you've got $1,000, for instance, in the balance of the user, and the price of the item is 50. Now, when the user tries to purchase the item, we're going to check if they have enough funds. So you're going to use a JavaScript keyword called if. So if will take a condition. So we're going to check that condition. If that condition is verified, then we're going to execute something. And we're going to put that inside curly brackets. Okay, so to check if we have enough funds, we will just compare the balance of the user to the price of the item. So if the price of the item is less than the balance, then we're just going to execute the payments, or in our case, to make it simple, we'll just log something in our console saying payment successful. And then we'll change the balance, and we're going to reduce the price like this. Now, if the condition is not verified, we'll do something else. We're just going to say else. So else is another keyword, JavaScript keyword, which you use to execute another instruction when the initial condition is not verified. So in that case, we'll just log something else saying you don't have enough funds. Okay, so let's refresh the page and see what we get. So it says payment successful because we have enough funds to purchase that item. Now, if let's say the balance is only 40, then you're going to get you don't have enough funds. So again, we checked a condition. If the condition is verified, we executed that. Otherwise, we executed that. So let's have a look at another example. So we're going to check the speed of a car on the motorway. So let's define a variable speed and set it to 50 miles per hour, for example. So now we're going to check the speed of the car, but this time we want to have three cases. We want to check if the speed is less than 40, or between 40 and 70, or over 70. And for each scenario, we're going to print something in our console. So in our case now, we've got three cases. In the first example, we had only a couple of cases. So we just checked the condition. If it's verified, we did something, and then we said else, do something else. Well, in the new scenario, we have three cases here. So how are we going to handle this? So let's start the same way we started the first one. So we're going to check one of these conditions. So we've got under 40, between 40 and 70, and then over 70. So let's start with this scenario here, over 70. So if the speed is over 70, then we're going to print something to the console. Now, if we say else, then we write something else, then our code will be finished right there. We've got another scenario here. We want to check two cases. So let's check if the speed is less than 40. So to do that, instead of else, you're going to have else if. And then you check if the speed is less than 40. So now we covered that case there in this condition. We covered that case there in this condition. And now we're left with that one. And an else statement will be enough, like that. So if the speed is over 70, let's print something like you are going too fast. Now if the speed is less than 40, you are going too slow. Else, so else means that it's not over 70, it's not under 40, meaning it's between 40 and 70. So in that case, we're just gonna print your speed is fine. All right. So let's refresh and see what we get. So we get your speed is fine because our speed is 50 and that's between 40 and 70. If you try 80, for example, then you're going to get you're going too fast. If you try 30, then you are going too slow on the motorway. Now a quick comment about our first example. When you were checking the balance of the user, you can also use less than or equal to in your condition, because if the balance is the same as the price, you can still purchase the item, right? So in the next video, we're going to learn switch statements. In this video, you're going to learn switch statements. So just like you did with if statements, where you checked a condition and you run an instruction if the condition was verified, in switch statements, you can do that, but slightly differently. Using a switch statement, you're going to check a variable against a set of values. And if you find a match, then you're going to run an instruction. Well, let's build an example and understand how it works. I'm going to create a variable user input where I'm going to store a user input. So let's say that the user gave us winter. So we want to check the variable user input against the 4 seasons of the year. If we get a valid season, then we're going to print something into our console. If we don't get any valid season, then we're just going to say that we can't recognize that. So to build a switch statement, we're going to use the switch keyword. And then we're going to place our variable inside parentheses like this. And then we're going to have curly brackets where we're going to document all the cases. So let's start with case number 1. So you're going to use the case keyword, space, the value that you want to match. So we're going to start with autumn. And then you're going to have colon followed by your instruction. So let's say that we just want to log something into our console. It is autumn time. All right, and then you break. So breaking using the break keywords, the keyword means that if you find a match, you run that instruction and then you break here, meaning you get out of the switch statements. So you're not going to check the other cases that comes after. So let's add another case. So I'm going to add fall, which is the same as autumn. So we just want to accommodate users whether they use the UK word or the US word. So fall time. And then let's move to winter. And then spring. And finally, summer. So now that we covered all the 4 seasons, we need to add a default case. So the default case will run if you don't find any match in those 5 values. So let's print something in this scenario and say, I do not recognize that or this. All right. So let's run our code. So it says it is winter time because the value there is winter. Let's try summer. It says it is summertime. Let's try something that is not a season. And it says, I do not recognize that. All right, so now that gives you a good understanding about how switch statements work. Let's make our code better. So instead of writing or setting our variable user input to a value ourselves, let's ask the user to give us a value using JavaScript and then store that value inside the variable user input. So to do that, we're going to use the JavaScript prompt function. And we're going to give it a string saying, please input a season. So let's try that. So now JavaScript is asking the user to provide a value. So let's try spring. Okay. And it says it is springtime. So let's try something else. Winter. It is winter time. All right, so we made our code slightly better. Now let's suppose that the user writes winter, but with a capital letter at the beginning. Well, we don't recognize that. Well, let's rectify this. So there is a simple way to do that. We can just convert whatever the user gives us to lowercase before we check the code. So in this line, we get whatever the user provided. That's the actual user input. Now we're going to take that input and transform it to lowercase or lowercase letters. So to do that, you're going to set the value user input to a new value. So to transform a string to lowercase letters, you get the string itself, and then you're going to use a method which is inherited from the global string object. We'll cover this later, but this will just give you a quick example. So we're going to use to lowercase, like that. All right. So now, if you print this variable, you will see what it looks like. So let's print it at the beginning, right after the user provides it, and let's print it after the conversion. So let's give summer, for example. So that's what the user gave. That's after the transformation, and that's the result of our switch statements. All right, so in the next video, we're going to cover for statements. In this video, you're going to learn JavaScript for statements. So what is a for statement? Let's have a quick look at one example and understand the need for a for statement. So let's say that you want to print numbers between 0 and 100. So you might think about doing a console.log 0 and then console.log 1, then 2. I'm sure that you don't want to continue this until you reach 100. All right. There is an easy way of doing this by using a for statement. So you can notice here that we are writing the same instruction every time. And the only thing that changes is what you put inside parentheses. If we name what you're putting inside parentheses variable I, then what changes here is just the value of I. So you want to write that instruction with I equal to 0, then you want to do it again with I equal to 1, then again with I equal to 2, and you want to carry on until you reach 100. Now, JavaScript comes with something that we call a for statement. So you can write a for statement like this, and you're going to define a variable I which starts at 0, or you can initialize to 0. Okay, and then you just run your instruction console.log I. But you need to add something else inside your for statement. You want to tell JavaScript that I needs to be less than 100. And then you're going to tell JavaScript that from one instruction to the other, you're going to increment I by 1. So you can just say I equals I by 1, meaning that you're going to run console.log 0, and then I becomes 0 plus 1, that's 1. And then you're going to run console.log I with I equal to 1. And then you're going to continue like that. And every time I becomes the next number. If you remember, an easier way of writing I equals I plus 1 was to write I plus plus, like this. So now, if we run this code, let's see what we get. Well, you can see that we printed numbers from 0 to 99, but we wanted numbers from 0 to 100. So let's just change that to 101. And that gives us numbers from 0 to 100. So for now, let's just change that to 5, and that will just give us numbers from 0 to 4. So now you understood how a for statement works. You can build another example on your own. I'm going to build something slightly different now. So I'm going to start this time from 7. And I want to print square numbers from 7 to 0, meaning that I want to print 7 square and then 6 square and continue until 0 square, like this. So how are you going to do that? Well, we can still use a for statement. We're going to start from 7. And the first thing to do before looking inside the statement or the conditions, we're going to look at what instructions or what instruction we're going to write inside our for statement. So we want a number to the power of 2. So if you remember, we can use the power method of the global objects math, and we're going to have the base as the first parameter, and then the exponent as the second one. So that means I to the power 2. Now we want to go from 7 to 0. So we're going to start from 7. And the condition here is that we're going to continue until 0. So we want I to be greater than 0. Well, it's not going to be, this is not 100% correct, but let's try that first. And instead of incrementing I, you're going down by 1 every time. So you start with 7, then you go down to 6, and then you carry on. So instead of I++, we're going to have I minus minus. So if you try this code, you get 49, 36, and you continue until 1 square. But we want 0 square as well. Well, you can just change 0 to -1. And now that will give you from 7 square to 0 square going backwards. All right, now let's have another example. So this time you want to loop through an array. So what does it mean? So let's create an array shopping list and set it to a list of items, bread, milk, and eggs. So now we want to print all the items of the shopping list like this. So we want to have item, and then we want to have the item number, and then we want to have a colon like that, and then we want to have the name of our item. So how are we going to do this? All right, so we're going to use a for statement. And before we check the conditions, we're going to write our instruction. So we're going to console.log item. All right. Then we're going to add the item number. All right. And then we're going to have a colon with a space. And then we're going to have the item name. Okay, so the item number can be chosen as the index of the item inside the array. And we can set that as our variable I. All right. And just a comment, instead of redeclaring I every time, you can use another variable if you like. Or just set I straight away like that without redeclaring it, because you have already declared it at the beginning. That is valid as well. Otherwise, you can just declare a new one. And just make sure that you name it something else. If you declare a new variable there, you just name it J, for instance, or anything like. If you don't want to declare another variable, you can just use I again. I'm going to use it again here. And I'm going to start from position 0 or item number 0. And then the condition is going to be, we're going to go from item number 0 to item number 2. So we want I to be less than 3. Okay, less than 3 strictly. So that means that it's going to go from 0 to 2. And every time you just increment I, like we did before. So now you're going to print item plus the item number plus the item name. And how are we going to get the item name? To get the item name, we're just going to access the item using the array. So the item name is array and then index of the item. All right. So hopefully it all makes sense. So let's try this. So item 0, bread, item 1, milk, and then item 2, eggs. And you can add a dot at the end, like that. And that looks better. Now, instead of going up to 3, if you don't know the length of your array, then you can just get the length of the array. If you remember, to get the length of an array, we just use the array dot length. And that will work as well. Okay, so now let's have another example. So this time I'm going to declare a new variable number list. So I've got numbers inside an array. So let's go for 1, 2, 3. So this time I want to loop through the array and make changes to the array itself. And change it. So for example, we want to increase each number inside our array by 10. So now you understood how to loop through arrays. So you're going to use the same way we did before. So instead of shopping list dot length, I'm going to have number list dot length. And instead of logging something to the console, this time we just want to increase each of the numbers by 10. So to access a number, we're going to use the name of the array and then the index. And then to increase it by 10, we're going to write plus equal 10. Now let's log our array and see what we get. And you can see that each of the elements of the array has been increased by 10. All right, so in the next video, you're going to learn while statements. In this video, you're going to learn while loops in JavaScript. So far, you managed to write 4 loops to run a certain instruction for a known number of times, or to loop through an existing collection like an array. Now, what if you don't know the extent of the loop? Well, in that case, you need what we call a while loop. Well, first of all, before diving into a real example of a while loop where you don't know the extent of the loop, let's understand how while loops work. So I'm going to copy a for loop, our basic one, the first one, and then I'm going to convert that loop to a while loop. So that's going to be actually a fake while loop because there is no need really to use a while here because we can do it using a for loop. But let's just do it using a while loop. So the condition here is that we are running this instruction as far as I is less than 5. So what we can do is set a variable x to 0. You can call it I as well if you like, if you didn't have that. Now, to write a while loop, I'm going to write while a certain condition is verified, then log x. So we want to do this while x is less than 5. The problem with this is that if you write this code like that, we're going to have an infinite loop, and the loop is just going to continue forever, because x is equal to 0, and every time you're just logging 0. You're not changing x at all. So you're going to log 0, and then you're going to check, oh, 0 is less than 5, let's log 0 again, and you're going to continue like that forever. Now you need to do something. You need to change x whenever you log it. So you're going to increment x by 1. So now you're going to start by x equal to 0, you're going to log 0, and then x is going to change, it's going to become 1. It's verifying x less than 5, so you're going to log 1, then x becomes 2, you carry on until x becomes 5. So once x becomes 5, then you get out of the while loop. So let's try that. So we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's how a while loop works. So as we said earlier, this is a fake one because we could do it using a for loop. Now let's get to a real while loop. So let's say that you've got a balance of $1,000. Okay. And you enter a shop where you pick random items with random prices. And every time you pick an item, you just try to buy it if you still have enough funds. And you keep buying and buying and buying until you have 0 in your bank account. So we're going to use a while loop here. So the condition of our while loop is going to be balance is greater than 0. So as far as your balance is positive, you can continue buying stuff. Now, what we're going to do inside our while loop, we're going to pick an item with a random price, and then we're going to buy the item. So to pick the item, let's say that the items inside the shop, they all have a price between 0 and 100. Okay. So let's define a variable that we're going to call item price. And we need to store inside this variable a random number between 0 and 100. Well, it needs to be between 1 and 100 because you can't buy an item which costs $0. So first of all, let's use the function math.random. So the function math.random is going to return a number between 0 and 1 strictly. Okay, so to understand this, let's comment this code for now and just console.log math.random to see what we get. So you get 0.38, 0.14, 0.71, and so on. So every time you're going to get a number between 0 and 1. It is possible you get 0, but it is not possible you get 1. So the number you get here is less than 1 strictly. So now we want a number between 1 and 100, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to multiply this by 100. Well, let's try. Oh, perfect. So that will give us a number between 0 and 100 strictly. All right. So So it's possible you get 0, but it's not possible you get 100. So to get between 1 and 100, you just add 1 to the result. So now we are sure we're going to get something between 1 and 100. So again, this will give us something between 0 and 1 strictly. This is going to give us something between 0 and 100 strictly, meaning it's actually between 0 and 99. So you add 1, that gives you something between 1 and 100. So we're going to use this. So to comment or uncomment things that you select, you just do command / or window /. So now we've got our item price. Now before buying the item, you need to check if we've got enough funds to buy the item. So if we've got enough funds to buy the item, we're just going to go ahead and buy it. Otherwise, we're going to need to go back to the beginning of the loop. So now to check if we've got enough funds, we're just going to compare our balance to the price of the item. So if the item price is less than our balance, well, actually it should be less or equal to. Okay. Then if that's the case, we are ready to buy the item. So I'm going to write that inside. And here we're going to check if we can afford the item. Now to buy the item, we're going to reduce our balance. And then we're going to print something in our console. So I'm going to print the new balance and also the purchase amount. Okay. You can do something different. I'm just using the variables that I've got here to print something on the screen. So now we're going to print something like let's say that we're going to print the item number. Okay, that's the item number. So first item is going to be item number 0 or item number 1, and so on. So, and then I'm going to print the item price. Okay. And to print the price, we're just going to use the variable item price. Now we're going to need a variable item number, which we're going to define at the beginning. So at the beginning, our item number is going to be 0. And whenever we buy an item, then this item number is going to increase by 1, meaning that we're moving to the next item. So now to update the balance, you need to take your balance and reduce it by the price that you've just paid. So you paid item price, so you're going to reduce your balance by that item price. All right. So now we printed that, and also you might want to print your new balance if you like. Again, you can do anything you like with these variables. I'm just trying something to make things easy for you to get used to programming. So I logged a string, and then I need the balance. So the balance is inside our variable balance. And you can add a dots if you like. You can add it there as well. All right, now before we try our code, let's make a quick change to the price of our items and make them round numbers. So we know that this is going to return a number which is not round. So let's make it round. So we're just going to use the math.floor method, which will transform our price to a round number. So if you remember, the difference between math.floor and math.round, math.floor will give you the nearest smallest whole number or integer, while math.random will give you the nearest integer or round number. So for example, if you give math.floor 3.6, it's going to return 3. If you use math.random with 3.6, then you're going to get 4. All right, so now let's try our code. So we can see here that we've got, that's the first item number 1. That's item number. And then item price. So we've got a random price 13. So we spent 13. That's our new balance. Then we spent 37. And then our balance keeps getting updated until we get $0 in our account. Now let's make our code a little bit more exciting. So instead of having a variable balance, let's ask the user to tell us how much they would like to spend using the prompt function. So we're just going to say how much would you like to spend in our shop? So let's see. And let's say that we've got $500. All right. So it works. Let's try again. 2000. And here we go. All right, so in the next video, you're going to learn a do-while loop. In this video, you're going to learn do-while loops. So in the previous video, you learned while-do loops. If we copy the first basic example that you used, you can see that we printed x while x verified that condition. Now, if we started with x equal to 5, for example, then the condition will never be verified and you won't see anything printed to your screen. Now, sometimes in your projects, you want the while loop to execute the instruction at least once. So if you want that, then you need to use the while do loop. The while do loop is very similar to the while loop, but the syntax will change slightly. So instead of having a while condition do things, you're going to have do things while condition, like this. So now if you try that, the instruction inside is going to be executed at least once. And then after execution, you're going to check the condition. So that's the reason behind using a do while loop. In this video, you're going to get introduced to functions in JavaScript. In JavaScript and other programming languages, you will find the concept of a function. So what is a function? Let's start with an example. Let's say that you are developing a program where you've got to print to the console, hello, and you need to do this several times. So you might choose to just keep writing console.log hello all the time, which becomes a little bit too heavy. And this is just a simple example. Now, instead of doing that, you can just place this code inside a function. So to create a function, we're going to use the function keyword. And then we're going to name our function. Now, following the name of the function, you need to have parentheses and then curly brackets. And then inside the curly brackets, you can just copy your code in there. So you've just created a function, grading, which you can call whenever you like. So what does it mean? This means that you can just call this function and have the code inside the function executed without having to rewrite the code. So this makes your code easy to read and easy to use as well. So if you refresh the page, nothing happens. Well, you have just created a function. You haven't called it. All right, now let's see how we can use our function. Before we do that, out of curiosity, you can just write something like console.log the function itself to see what we get. Let's see. Well, you can see actually the function declaration there. And you can see the name of your function. And you can also see what we wrote inside the function. Now, if you want to call the function or execute it, then to do that, you need the name of the function and the parentheses. Now, if you do that, then the code inside the function is going to be executed. And now you can see hello. So our function for now is just a simple one. It doesn't have any parameters. Now you can create another function with a parameter. So let's say that instead of writing console.log hello, you want something like this. So you're going to write, you want to write hello plus a variable first name of your user, and then you want an exclamation mark. So the variable first name is going to change, and you will need to give it to your function. You will need to determine the value of that variable. So in this scenario, you will need a function with a parameter. So let's define this function. So let's call it grading2. Unlike the first function, this function is going to take a parameter. Because first name is going to change all the time, we're going to place it in the parameters of our function. So now to execute your function, grading2, you will need to give it a value, a string. So now let's see what happens. And we get hello, Mike. Now, unlike other programming languages, the parameters in the function can be passed to the function in a dynamic way, because JavaScript will take care of the type of your variable, depending on how you use the variable inside your function's code. So you don't have to tell JavaScript that you're working with strings or numbers or whatever. JavaScript will just take care of that. All right, now let's define another function that will take more than one parameter. So let's create a function which will sum two numbers. I'm going to call it sum. It's going to take two variables, a and b, and it's going to return the sum of these two. So to return something, you need to use the return keyword. So you're just going to return a plus b. Now let's use this function and store the value inside a variable x. So let's set it to the sum of 3 and 7, and then let's print x. And let's see what we get. And we get 10 as expected. So this function returns something. That function actually doesn't return anything. It just prints something into your console, but it doesn't return anything. If you set a variable y and you set it to the value of greeting 2 of Mike, you're gonna get, well, let's print y and see what you get. You're just gonna get undefined. So this function does return something, it returns undefined. But this function actually returns the sum of a and b. In this video, you're going to learn more about function return values. You've seen previously that a function can either return undefined or a value like our sum function. Okay. Now there is another type of functions which will return a function, and that is possible in JavaScript. So let's create a function great which returns a function. So I'm going to write the function exactly the same way as if I was defining the function or creating it in the global scope, meaning not inside a function. So at the moment we are writing this inside another function. So we are returning a function which takes no parameters and just prints hello as well. So now if you want to use the function great, what's going to happen? So if you write great, that's our function great. Now if you write it with parentheses, that means that it's going to return a function. So this is a function. Now, if you want to use this function, you need to give it parentheses. And since it doesn't take any parameters, you can just write the parentheses with nothing inside them. So now if you execute this, then you get hello. So again, what's happened here? Great with parentheses returns a function, this one. And then if you want to use that function, you just add parentheses to it to use it. Now let's say that great takes a parameter x. And our new function, which is returned by great, also takes a parameter name. And when we write console.log, we actually use both x and name. So let's say that we write x plus space plus name plus a question mark. Like that. So now, to use the function great, you need to give it a parameter. So let's give it a parameter hello. And to use the function great of hello, remember that's a function, is this one. So to use great of hello, you need to give it a parameter name. So let's set that parameter name to Mike, for example. So now if you execute your code, you get hello Mike. Now you can try again with another value. Instead of hello, you can go for hi for x, and then you give your name variable a value John, and you get hi John. Now let's do something interesting. Let's print our function great of hello. Remember, that's a function. So we know that great of hello will return a function, which is going to be console.log of hello plus name. Now let's see if we get that. Well, interesting. We said we were expecting a function of name which returns console.log of hello plus name because we gave great a parameter hello. But in reality, we get console.log of x. Although we have given this function great a value which should replace x. But JavaScript will keep x in memory. Don't worry about this for now. You will understand this in a better way and complete way when you study closures, which is in the advanced sections. So for now, just remember that a function can either return undefined, a value, or return a function.